name is Ashley Reardon, and I'm a SETA contractor for the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, where I perform as the primary technical point of contact for research and development into defense-wide learner records and interoperable course catalog networks. I am also joined by Jerry Gordon, who is the Systems Integration Manager for Unmanned Systems at Gibbs & Cox. He was previously a SETA contractor at ADL Initiative, where he was a technical manager and architect of the total learning architecture. So today in this presentation, we're going to discuss our research on an enterprise learner record solution and talk through our data and architecture approach for achieving this solution. So when we think about the learning ecosystem of the future, it's all about achieving this data dominance and being able to access data all around us where learning occurs so we can start to do fun things with these data and really start to modernize the way in which we do lifelong learning. So when we think about learning in the context of an entire career, a learner is going to complete a wide variety of activities, which all generate these valuable pieces of learner data. But right now, what's stored is really that high-level piece of data. So maybe it's just that certificate, or maybe it's just that diploma. We're really not getting that level of granularity we need to be able to leverage data in meaningful ways. And further, these data are stored in these proprietary data silos, and using different formats, it makes it very difficult to be able to transport these data to even be used in the first place. So when we look at moving towards this ecosystem or this manifold interconnected approach, it's all about breaking down these silos and connecting data across these systems. And when we talk about learner data, we're not just talking about formal learning data, we're talking about things that happen in the wild. So all of these informal learner pieces. So that might be watching a video on YouTube or going through an ebook, being able to capture learning where it occurs all around us. And when we do that, we can really start to have a more learner-centric approach. We can really start to do fun things like doing analytics, personalization, being able to actually capture competencies that we have across the DoD. So ultimately, this is the strategy for building this connective tissue. This is going to allow us to get a more strategically ready, globally relevant, and flexibly sustainable personnel and readiness enterprise. So in order to get to that connected ecosystem, we must consider these core challenges. So looking at infrastructure, these must be designed at scale. Right now, we deal with point-to-point links, which become computationally explosive as we start to add more links. Next, we need to close that loop on training efficacy. Right now, analyses usually only occur as a response when something bad happens, but we need to be able to do these analyses and catch problems before they occur. We need to be able to build that connective tissue across this enterprise. We need to be able to connect in our manpower personnel with training and education. This is going to allow us to recruit and retain relevant talent. And part of that is being able to have this validated and consistent method for assessing readiness. Finally, we do need to be aware of training needs as they occur so we can start to implement these changes immediately because we can't afford to wait on those changes. So in summary, we don't have access to rich learner data pieces, and what we do have is trapped in these data silos. So we start to see some effects like concurrency loss, rate of return cost, and variances and missed opportunities in learning. As a result, ADL has been doing research on an enterprise learner record repository capability, which is all about unlocking these data in silos and achieving this interoperability so we can start to connect all the relevant local and global learner data throughout the span of a career and making these data safe and secure and accessible during their point of need to be able to do those fun things like the analyses and personalization and utilize machine learning and artificial intelligence. The ELR is one major line of effort of the Enterprise Digital Learning Modernization Reform, which comes out of the Chief Management Office, who directed that we modernize learning so we can start to get towards that interconnected ecosystem. So this is where we're at right now. The ELR project is focused on building this operational prototype with all the technical infrastructure to start to share these rich learner data pieces across different systems. We are collaborating with stakeholders such as the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy to be able to help support the final development towards a full operational capability that can be deployable across the DoD. So let's go ahead and talk about data. What does lifelong learning look like from a data point of view? Well, first, we want to be able to get an understanding of what the learner brings to the table. So all of the past learner knowledge, skills, and abilities, these will all be stored in a learner record store. Being able to understand the learner's current state, all of these core pieces of information will be stored in the learner profile. What learning opportunities are available to the learner, all of these pieces of data will be stored in an experience index, which becomes important when coupled with a competency framework, so we can start to understand what experiences will lead to what specific knowledge, skills, and abilities. By getting an understanding of where the learner came from and where the learner's at now, where they want to go, we can really start to optimize that path to help them achieve and increase their velocity towards credentials that they might want or certain career milestones or learner goals. So ultimately, this leads to a giant database of lifelong learner data. But how do we understand what that means and how we're going to use that? To make sense of all of these data, we created these control loops to help contextualize it. So this isn't something that's tangible, it's just a way of thinking about these learner data. In our first control loop, we have optimizing learner data for the current learning activity. So this might look like using an intelligent tutoring system to being able to incorporate some remediation, being able to change the challenge based off of current performance. The second control loop is about using and sequencing those learner activities towards accomplishment of a credential. That third control loop is all about job performance. So what job requirements are needed, what credentials are needed to get a specific job. We're talking about those specific requirements, pieces of data. And then at the fourth and fifth level, it's all about the entirety of a career or a change in career. So being able to optimize jobs in support of those career goals. So this is our higher state of learner data. The biggest takeaway are these data are part of an integrated 4-pillar data strategy, all based off of standards. Looking at the top, we have learner activity streams runtime. So that's all about getting the frontline data out of training and education, being able to measure what a student's doing and getting their performance data. So we need a way to store these data long term. That's where the learner profiles come into play. These will also include other attributes to help customize training opportunities. There's a lot of different standards out there supporting these integrated learner records. One in particular, IEEE is working towards a standard called the Learner Record Standard 1484.2, and this is really about harmonizing the different standards that are out there. The third pillar is about capturing all the learning opportunities that are out there. So knowing what courses are available or what learning opportunities from informal videos are books or formal job placements. What are all the opportunities that a learner might be able to have access to? IEEE is also working on a standard for learner metadata, the P288.1, which also supports harmonization towards capturing learner opportunities. Finally, we need a common currency for describing what's in all of these buckets. For example, if we talk about obtaining a skill in leadership, we need to understand what leadership means because that word can be defined in many different ways across many different organizations. One of our outcomes of our research is this master object model. We can look at this in terms of the ELR as the thing that ties together different threads of activity or certification that are captured. So at a high level, learning is done through all of these states, whether that's something that's implicitly or explicitly done. And we need a way to be able to capture these so we can have confidence in asserting competencies and credentials. So at the very end, when you get to the locating, which is updating that record of competency, based on the evidence and confidence of that evidence, this ensures that confidence in the credential. So the ELR is really the summation of all of these things happening. This is how we're thinking about achieving data interoperability and achieving that common currency for describing all the learner data that we just discussed. Starting at the bottom, we're able to capture data from these learning activities through XAPI statements. When a learner goes through a simulated exercise, we get all sorts of data. We might get eye clicks, we might get stress levels. We might get all forms of biometric and performance data. We might not want all that data right now, but we do want to maintain that evidence. So these are all stored in this noisy learner record store. These are maintained at that local organizational level. The mom verbs, which is what we previously discussed, really help filter and make meaningful data out of these pieces. These derived data are stored in the transactional learner record store. The transactional LRS allows competency management systems to process these derived data to help make the assertions about a learner's competence. So what we're using right now is CAS, or the Competency and Skills System. CAS pulls metadata about every activity from the experience index, as well as relevant competency frameworks to understand how the learner's performance within that activity applies to one or more competencies. After CAS makes an assertion of competence, it is signed in the authoritative LRS. This ultimately rolls up to credentials. By using this type of federated approach, we're able to maintain data ownership and data stewardship. And as such, we establish this evidentiary chain with pointers to the original performance data.
Yes, thank you, Ashley. So now that we have effectively a local repository of competencies and credentials, we need to be able to figure out how to expose this to the greater world so that it is discoverable across an individual's overall career. Because any particular service member is going to have multiple jobs over their life. And currently, the way that we do this is by basically making a copy of everything they do and putting it in their personal training record, which we then move around with them as they transfer from one place to another. But the idea here is to make this more digitally available and, more importantly, digitally non-repudiable. So one of the technologies that we've looked at is a thing called the data fabric. Data fabrics are a collection of database technologies, access technologies, and high-speed communication backplanes that allow you to have a very large, distributed, heterogeneous data pool that you can then perform high-speed actions on. This is sort of the secret sauce technologically behind big data, as most people have heard of. So we've taken our authoritative LRS information and trusted records and exposed them across all the locations that might have performance data associated with a particular individual. That could be all 250 or thereabouts schoolhouses across the services, or it might even be as many as 11,000 different UIC codes, unique UIC codes that actually may maintain some kind of qualification record for the personnel assigned to them. So in general, we need to have some kind of directory service that lets us know who the person is and how to find all the records associated with them. And after that, it's really relying on that high-speed communication to be able to serve up those records as requested. Additionally, because those records are coincident with their transactional LRSs, we can dig down into the specific information that was used to make those summative findings of competency and credential, so that we can actually start to do some population-wide or longitudinal analyses if we start seeing that there are systemic performance problems where we want to go back and say, okay, is this particular media a good one? Is this credential got all the things in it that's necessary to really show that somebody who's been conferred that credential is capable of doing the job? Is this particular specialty or our career field really producing the kind of people that they need in order to be able to do the job? Any kind of those ad hoc questions can then be answered, and the data can be retrieved across the data fabric. Next slide, please. So by way of example, we're going to take a single learner here. We have Alice, who's an airman. She has an acquisition career. She starts out, she wants to make a sergeant major. So she'll have her total force training record, which will be her repository, or in this case, the view into multiple repositories of the summation of all of her career performance. So, for example, she needs to get to her next career milestone. So she's reviewing her training requirements in her career field management tools and understanding that she needs to go to a school for a certain purpose. So she might register for that school after having found it through an electronic catalog like the Enterprise Course Catalog. and then registering, so for example, through a series of DAU courses. So all of this information is linked together by the data fabric so that it is mutually discoverable from all the different pieces that might rely on it. So when she's conferred her credential, we need to know what the school was. We need to know what the school taught. We need to know that she is she. We want to know who their instructors were, what the particular coursework that she did was. And we need to make sure that when somebody called something, that there is a single point, our schema.mil, for defining exactly what that means. Next slide, please. So as she proceeds through this, she may take her course and complete it and receive a certificate, and that certificate might be assigned to a credential like the awarding of an MOS or a subspecialty code. And the DAU's local learner profile will have a store or record of her, and it will update the ELR that I have records on Alice. If somebody wants to find out what the records actually are, that she got that specific credential, or what her, going even down into like specific grading information, depending on their level of access credentials, they can go in and dig that because they'll have that master directory that tells them to go point to the learner profile for the DAU. Similarly, her credential assertion is automatically sent to CAS. If that instance of CAS may be part of DAU, it might be part of her parent command. It really depends on where she is currently registered. The CAS system can pull all the metadata associated with that to evaluate any assertions of competence, and determine in situ what that evidence really means in terms of her overall level of competency to perform a job. And then that information in turn updates the ELR, and the ELR information now becomes visible using that total course training record, or TIFTR, or Airman Learning Record, ALR, as a view into the information that's being presented and distributed throughout that data fabric. Next slide, please. So in general, the data fabric is a set of technologies, but it's also a set of organizational processes. The first process is governance. We kind of think of this as sort of an internet of education, or in this way, you can kind of think of the ELR as a domain name service, or DNS for learning. In much the same way the internet works on domain name service that tells you how to find a physical computer somewhere when you have an IP address. And that's all managed through the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN. Similarly, we have to have a series of enterprise assets that tell us how to go find and transcribe all of these records and map them to a person who is actually the person who is awarded these credentials. As part of that, we need to maintain identity management, and this is all brought under a series of National Institute for Standards and Technology, or NIST standards, for a series of things called Federated Identity, Credential, and Access Management, or FICAM. This ensures that the person we're talking about is actually the person we're talking about, and that we can have a way of resolving their identity without actually having to have all of their releasable information as part of the database that stores who they are. And related to that, of course, is cybersecurity. We need to be able to protect their personally identifiable information for the Privacy Act, but also for operational security, because we want to anonymize those records so that it's harder for an adversary to hack into the database and find out, everybody in this unit is just recently trained on this, so they're probably going to go do this operation. Well, we want to be able to protect that by making that information as hard to find as possible. And lastly, part of the secret sauce on the technology side is linked data, which is both a technology as well as an organizational concern. So in the commercial world, we have a thing called schema.org, which is maintained by Google and some of the larger internet companies. And what this does is it gives people a way of storing taxonomies, so they have fully qualified names and namespaces for things that they want to define. And when they refer to it, they want only to be used that definition. Well, we have to have the same thing in the military side, but protected behind the .mil firewall. So we're proposing a schema.mil, which effectively replicates all of that functionality, but does so in an IL4 or an IL6 environment that's protected and available only to DoD users. Next slide, please. So in summary, we've established, through our research, we've established sort of a 5-level maturity path to accomplish this, because it's going to take a while. There's an awful lot of legacy stuff out there. Not all that data is necessarily going to be made immediately available. So we want to give users an opportunity to be able to do this as a migration path. So the baseline is sort of where we are now, or where we have been in the past, where there's basically no formal way to share it. It's all written down on paper. Our prototype, which was the research that we've done over the last year or so, established the basic ways of compiling the learner data and arranging it into an interoperable format. And this year, some of the research that we're doing, or ADL is doing, starts to lay out some of those enterprise-level technologies, establishing that data fabric, and now looking to see that this learner data can be made discoverable. And this will establish an initial operating capability for this ELR. Over time, we'll add additional data sources and data governance, and start to be able to mature the data from the tactical level all the way up, and establish our final operational capability, which is where we'll have all the pieces necessary for even more users to come in and be able to describe their own data, to register people, to register devices, and for people to be able to have more learning opportunities and move around the DoD and have that all globally discoverable. And then eventually we get to the end state, which is our federated total learning architecture, where we have a true, complex, adaptive, open system ecosystem where you just show up, you can do your training, your grades are captured, its implication for your ability to do your job is updated, and you can just go on to the next one, and you don't have to do anything in order to maintain those records. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ashley for the conclusions.
In summary, we must abandon outdated approaches for training and education and start to move towards a more integrated and connected system approach. One of the major efforts that we're working on at ADL is supporting the Enterprise Learner Record Repository solution for being able to capture granular, detailed pieces of learner information and make sure these data are available across the enterprise, across the DoD for the time of need, so we can support being able to do these analytics and being able to do these customizations. As such, we're able to deliver learning at scale and support a more prepared and ready workforce. We encourage, if there's any questions, to please reach out to Jerry and I. We would be more than happy to answer any questions you have or share any of the resources that we have. Thank you.